Sonia Blount was born into a loving family in Tallaght in Ireland, and she and her two sisters were incredibly close. And when they grew up and eventually had children of their own, they became even closer. Sonia had given birth to a baby boy who she called Jake, and she was the sole carer for. After Sonia had broken up with her son's father, it was a tricky and quite obsessive breakup, and she was really looking forward to meeting new people and having new fun experiences. One day, Sonia received a Facebook message from a man she didn't know called Shane Cullen. She accepted his friend request and the two started talking, and they got on really well and they started talking more and more. The conversations became more frequent, and then the conversations turned to intimate and more romantic. They decided that over the following weekend, she would actually go to a hotel to meet Shane and the pair would spend the night together there. On the 15th of February 2014, Sonia had just finished celebrating her son's 3rd birthday. He'd had a big party with all of their family and friends. And that evening, she asked her grandmother to look after her little boy, Jake, so that she could go out and spend the evening at this hotel with the guy she'd met online, Shane Cullen. At around 8 p.m, she made her way over to the Plaza Hotel in Dublin. She checked in and she went upstairs to the room. She got herself settled and then she noticed that she had a text from Shane on her phone. And she read it and it said that he wanted her to leave the key card at reception so that he could just come on into the room. She messaged back saying not to worry and that she'd be awake, she'd be up, and so she'd be there to let him in. But, and I don't know how he did this, Shane managed to convince her that the best thing to do would be to leave the keycard at reception so that he could let himself in. Sonia's phone records show that there are a number of messages between herself and Shane, and one of them, she types that she's really nervous because she's never done anything like this before. At 11:58 p.m, she texted Shane saying, "You close? Falling asleep here." Although Shane didn't have his phone with him at this time, CCTV would track a man going to reception, picking up the key card for Sonia's room and taking the elevator to the 3rd floor. The man entered the elevator looking fairly normal, but by the time he got to the 3rd floor and came out of the elevator, he had disguised himself. He put on a cap and he was face down. Now, the next day, Sonia's family began to grow concerned because they hadn't heard from her. Sonia's sister Claire, who she was incredibly close to, became worried pretty early on when she realised that Sonia hadn't called their grandmother to check in on how Jake was doing. If Sonia was ever away from her little boy, the first thing she would do in the morning would be to call and check in and make sure he was okay. She always wanted to speak to him. Claire didn't know what to do, and so she grabbed her brother and the two of them went across town to Claire's mum's house to see if she'd heard from Sonia at all, and also to start contacting some of Sonia's friends and acquaintances to try and figure out where she might be. Meanwhile, across town at the Plaza Hotel, staff were alerted to a room that hadn't been checked out, and that was Sonia's room. It was 3 p.m. by this point, way past checkout time, and so the staff entered the room, and what they found was terrifying. This is Red Rum, stories about the true victims of crime. When staff had entered that hotel room, they had immediately seen that things weren't right. They saw on the bed and on the floor there were cable ties and duct tape. And they found Sonia lying on the floor, dead. She had been subjected to a horrific ordeal where she'd eventually been strangled by a mobile telephone cord. By this point, Sonia's sister Claire and their brother had been on their way to their mum's house to try and help find out where Sonia might be, when Sonia's brother opened up his phone and he saw on Facebook there was a live update about a body having been found at the Plaza Hotel. Sonia's dad Chris had driven straight to the hotel, and when he got there he saw Sonia's car parked outside, and that was the moment he knew that body must be Sonia. It was also around this time Claire had arrived at the Plaza Hotel with her family, and she got a call from one of Sonia's work friends who said that Sonia had been planning the night before to go meet a friend, someone she'd met on Facebook, called Shane Cully. The authorities were called to the scene and they discovered an array of forensic evidence. And although that they would use that forensic evidence later in their investigation, they didn't actually need it to make an initial arrest. Later that day, a man had gone to the local station and he told the Irish police, the Gardaí, that he was the person responsible for Sonia's death. Although after this initial arrest, he did later plead not guilty to murder. The man was 33-year-old Eric Locke, also known as Shane Cully, and he was someone Sonia knew very well. The pair had worked together at Henkel Loctite, a glue manufacturing company, and not long after they had met, the pair started spending more and more time together and decided to start dating properly. One evening, not long into their relationship, Eric had surprised Sonia with tickets to a comedy show. The pair went, and at first everything had gone pretty smoothly, everything had gone as planned. But then Sonia decided to go outside and have a cigarette, and while she was outside, she started talking to another couple of people who had been at the comedy evening that night, including a couple of men. It wasn't long before Eric emerged from the comedy club, saw Sonia talking to these other people, and stormed over to her. He was not in a good mood. He told her she was a slut, and then he proceeded to grab her arm. He got quite physical with her and tried to grab her and pull her back to the club. Sonia was furious that Eric had had such an extreme reaction to essentially nothing, and that he'd put his hands on her. She'd been in an abusive relationship before and she wasn't going to do it again. She texted him the very next day and told him that she didn't want to see him ever again and the relationship was over. She had herself to think about, and her little boy. Eric did not take the breakup well. He started actually harassing Sonia, and remember that the two of them still work together, so they're seeing each other every day. And so Eric would see Sonia at work and he would beg her to take him back. He said he didn't mean what he'd done and it would never happen again. But Sonia was determined. She wasn't going to budge. She didn't want to be with him anymore. She didn't really want to know him anymore. And soon after that, however, Eric changed tact and he called her late one night and told her that he was going to end his life. He was going to a local hotel and that was where he was going to end his life. Sonia immediately called the Gardaí and told them what was happening and said that they needed to go and check on him immediately, which they did. And they found him not at the hotel, they found him nearby at a local coffee shop. And when they asked him what was going on, he said he never meant what he said to Sonia. It was all a joke and he wasn't planning on taking his own life. After that, Eric ended up writing Sonia a letter begging her again to take him back. By this point, it was beyond obsessive. And Sonia was getting quite worried. She was quite scared and she told him to please just back off and not to look at her, not to stare at her at work because it freaked her out. Throughout all of this, she tried to placate him. She would never become rude or aggressive and she always tried to see his side. She even said to some of her friends that she felt sorry for him and knew that he just was going through a difficult time mentally. On Saturday, the 8th of February, just a week before Sonia was killed, the two of them sent some final text messages to each other. On Saturday the 8th of February, just a week before Eric murdered Sonia, the two of them exchanged some final text messages. Then, the next day on Sunday, Eric asked his sister if she could put him in touch with one of her friends who he knew could help hack Sonia's Facebook for him. He said, quote, "I need a favour. I'm back with that girl. She's ripping me off behind my back." He went on to say that he knew this because he'd heard from two different people at work, and he said he needed to get into her Facebook account to see if it was true. It's not really clear what it is. He says she's ripping him off, but it's never made clear what he means by this. He said that after he got the proof from her Facebook, he would know to stay well away from her. But his sister's friend said that Sonia's Facebook page was private, and so there was actually nothing he could do. Eric's sister then told him to either talk it through with Sonia or just leave well alone, do one or the other. But Eric said that he couldn't do that, and actually he had this new plan where he was going to hack into her email account instead. And he asked his sister if her friend could help him do that, but his sister said no. Also, throughout all of this, Eric is seeing the relationship as extremely serious, but Sonia had never introduced Eric to her family, and her sister Claire said that the relationship couldn't have been that serious. As soon as it was, she definitely would have introduced him to her and the rest of the family. It became clear by this point that Eric had become extremely obsessed with Sonia. After this, when Sonia had gotten that message from the Shane Cully Facebook account, she told a few of her friends that she was planning on meeting him at a hotel for the night. And when she told them this, Sonia's friends became a little bit skeptical about who this man really was. The man she'd only ever spoken to on Facebook had just popped up one day randomly and was telling her everything she wanted to hear. Even they were worried at this point that Shane wasn't everything he pretended to be. They asked Sonia if the man behind the Shane Cully Facebook account could in fact be Eric. And Sonia was a smart woman. She did think this was maybe a possibility, so she decided to look into it further. She said she'd check by asking Shane to send a selfie of himself, which he did just a few seconds after she'd asked. And that was enough for her. That satisfied her that Shane was who he said he was. The trial went ahead, and Eric's defense was his mental stability. And a psychiatrist actually testified that Eric had a disorder, a pervasive developmental disorder. The psychiatrist said that they believed that Eric exhibited an extreme lack of empathy and that he had symptoms of ADHD. And when that psychiatrist asked Eric to describe himself, he said he was a, quote, lovely person, genuinely peaceful. And then another psychiatrist was called to testify, and they said that that defense just didn't hold up. They said that any mental disorder that Eric did have didn't diminish his responsibility, and the crime showed clear premeditation and uncontrollable rage. The psychiatrist did accept that Eric had a, as he put it, out-of-body experience at the time of the crime. When Sonia had blocked him on Facebook, he'd made that Shane Cully Facebook account so that he could continue speaking to her as this new person with this entirely new identity. And while this was all going on, he actually told his sister that Sonia had taken him back and things were going really well. The prosecution showed CCTV footage of Eric getting in that lift looking relatively normal after he collected the key card, and then the lift opening on the 3rd floor, and then Eric exiting that lift with his hat pulled down over his face and going to Sonia's room, room 346. Eric's statements at the time of his arrest were used in court. He said that when he got to Sonia's room, he opened up the door and went inside. And although she was initially shocked, the pair did end up having sex. He said that after that, he then tied Sonia to a chair with the intention that he just wanted to keep her still and quiet whilst he explained himself. His plan had gone wrong, and so he then used her own t-shirt to stop her from making any noise, and then he strangled her with the mobile phone cord. The attack was violent, and Sonia suffered broken bones, bruises and cuts, and she'd also scratched Eric a number of times. The prosecution outlined the lack of any kind of history of mental illness, and they finished with their closing arguments. Ultimately, the jury did not believe the diminished responsibility defense, and Eric was sentenced to life in prison. A family friend spoke after the verdict and sentencing had been completed. Quote, "A special word of warning to everybody using social media sites. We urge you to please be cautious and be aware. It is so easy to set up false profiles. Sonia made an error of judgment and paid for this with her life. Sonia was an innocent, beautiful, kind, caring person and mother who is sadly missed by all of us who knew her and loved her." And her sister said that the trial left many questions unanswered, questions that they would likely never know the answers to. Quote, "How much did she suffer in her final moments? What were her final words? Nothing can be undone. We will never have our beautiful Sonia back." Thank you for watching this episode of Red Rum. I'm Grace. I upload episodes every week, if not twice a week. If you enjoyed this, please hit the thumbs up button. If you aren't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you've ever got case suggestions, whack them down below. I'm making a list and I will get to them eventually. Thanks.